All right, we are recording now. So, what I just want to set this up. So, this is our first time doing this. I'm planning on a bit of a mess, but I'm really excited that we are even doing it. This was something that was brought up at ApacheCon. Hey, other open source projects do this. This would be a really good thing to try. Um, just more real-time communication between people instead of having to fly to Las Vegas, which isn't always a bad thing. Um, we can get together and have talk about agenda items. So the agenda items are posted in the Confluence for the Cassandra project. So those are visible and public. I'm recording this right now, so all the recording I'll post on YouTube. I have a couple of I think I still have access to the Cassandra or the Planet Cassandra channel, which seems fine. If there's somewhere else we want to put it, just let me know. I'll have a MP4 file at the end of this. But we have an agenda, and at this point, I think we can just start walking through it. If there's any technical issues, this is a time, this is my disclaimer. If we have things you want to change, take note, because at the very last thing on the agenda is, okay, we did this, now how do we want to change it? So I'm looking at the agenda, and it looks like Jordan added something, the 4.0 status, and let me just add this in here. If you're going to put something on the agenda, I think it's best if we have also like who wants to lead the discussion. So just so we keep it from being a free-for-all, which maybe don't want to be, but the first agenda item is 4.0 status.
I'm happy to lead that. I just didn't want to take it if there was someone who felt that they were better suited. Josh, for example, since he's done a bunch of work on the status itself. So I'm happy to lead it if no one else steps in.
I like listening. You go for it.
I was really hoping you were going to take it. I guess I don't know exactly where to start except for, you sent around an email. I guess it'd be useful to go over what work is in progress and stuck maybe. We don't need to go over literally every ticket that's in progress, but if someone has a ticket that's stuck and in progress, or if someone has a ticket for whatever the next milestone, next alpha milestone is that they need a review or something to discuss that now. But open to suggestions as well.
Yeah, one thing that I think would also be useful is to cover some of the work that's active, some of which is represented in that Confluence doc that I just linked in Slack a minute ago. We have a few areas that are complete. I know of some contributors who are working on a couple that are currently in progress. And there are also several areas that don't currently have a component owner. So if somebody would be interested to step up to lead that area of testing, validation, and test infrastructure, that'd be fantastic as well.
Yeah, and on that point, one of the things I'm planning on doing is actually piloting, taking the stuff from the Confluent and getting it into an Epic and Jira with verbatim the contents of that entire doc, and then just experimenting a little bit with subtasks to see if it might make sense to unify all that in Jira. That's very much going to be a try it out, and if we hate it, nuke it from orbit, but if we like it, run with it kind of thing. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to get to that in this past week, but I'm planning on doing that this week.
Awesome. Thank you for setting that up. The current reports that I have set up in Confluence are just a massive mess of JQL macros that are manually tweaked for every single one of those. The Confluence source editing plugin isn't enabled on ASF, so it was pretty tedious. Would love to pilot the Epic approach. Cool. Maybe we can start with just some active work that's going on toward testing and validation that's currently in progress. If we partition things into two segments, one is things that are known to be issues that need to be resolved ahead of 4.0 release. Those are things that are already noted in Jira and I think screened to the either alpha, beta, or GA release versions. But there's also work that's going on to identify issues that are currently unknown or things that we're not actually sure if there's a problem there or not. I think the latter is a little less defined, so that might be useful to talk a bit about. A moment ago, I linked a Confluence doc in the Cassandra Dev Slack channel that covers some of those. There's a whole lot of work that's gone into testing and validating internode messaging and the netty changes that were made. I know that Joey and Renee in particular have worked a lot with Alexi and Benedict toward validating a lot of that. Marcus and others, Marcus, Sam, and a few other people also released a tool called Cassandra Diff that's really useful for doing a complete exhaustive read of Cassandra clusters and identifying any differences in any column between the two, which is a really useful way of spotting issues that could be on the coordination or local read-write path. I think Alexi's also done an audit of systems tables and internal schema handling too. Work that's currently in progress that I'm aware of is on Harry, a tool for model-based testing of Cassandra that models the legal internal state of the database given responses to queries that were issued against it, and continually issues new queries and checks the state against that model. Work is going on to bring that to a degree of completion that would be appropriate for review and sharing on Jira. One point that I'm taking in advance is that we have very few contributors from European time zones on this call right now, so I think the next call should very much be aligned to make it easier for those folks to join. And also apologies for my culpability in selection of the time or proposal of the time too. So maybe in the next call we can hear a lot more about what's happening in Harry, although there is a ticket up on Jira to cover that. Jordan, I know you've also done a lot of work to test and validate and write new tests for index info as well, 11206. Do you want to cover that?
Yeah, sure. I was just looking at that on the, towards the end of last year, I spent some time just rereading the 11206 patch, testing it a bit more, both from a performance and correctness perspective. From a performance perspective, we ran it against some workloads that are known to really tax the system with large partitions, and saw some really encouraging numbers there, seeing 3 nines as high as a second or 2 seconds on the 3.0 branch, and at the 40-50 millisecond range on trunk. So that was really encouraging. From a correctness perspective, there was a new binary search that was implemented as part of this. So I used Harry. Harry has a kind of quick theories-like library, and then it has all the things that Scott talked about. So I used Harry to write a test to validate that, and that will be open sourced as part of the Harry open source process. So that all looks good there. Feeling more confident about that patch. There were 2 tickets, 15469 and 15470, that came out of those that are currently under review. But it's all sort of like minor refactors and cleanup and code clarity, nothing around correctness or performance at this time.
Awesome, thanks, Jordan. A couple other areas were upgrade and diff tests. That's also listed under that in the Confluence doc. This is, I guess you could think of like mechanizing Cassandra diff to test upgrading a cluster from 3x to 4.0, and then validating correctness both mid-upgrade and post-upgrade. Or when I say correctness, I mean identity between the two. But there are also several areas where work might not necessarily be active, or where there's not necessarily someone who's signed up to either lead or take on some of that work. John has shared some of those in Slack right now too. John, do you want to cover those items?
Sure, I'm happy to. So that list is just by going down and looking through who has a shepherd assigned to them or not. And there are a few very important pieces of the database still that I think are worth having a look at, particularly the coordinators, replication, and read repair. Obviously being critical functionality, making sure that metrics are still operational and or at least if they've changed, having their new meanings or their new interpretations documented for release notes. As far as tooling, Sam's going to take the JDK 11 internal tooling, but I don't think he has much cause to run external tooling as part of his day-to-day work, so it would be much nicer if somebody who does regularly run things like Reaper and some of the other tools to do that. Cluster setup and maintenance, that's obviously just important to have some baseline testing on. I don't know if that's going to require updating some of the JVM testing, or if it's going to require resuscitating some of the Python D-tests. Similarly, platforms and runtimes. Most operators probably run on a fairly narrow selection of platforms, and I don't know if anyone's run any of the Cassandra 4.0 stuff on Windows, or if that port's just dead. Documentation, it looks like we've had a can't remember the name of the person that opened all of the tickets on documentation, but it seems like they might be a really good candidate to step up. And finally, transient replication, making sure that it doesn't negatively impact any of the other features in the database as more than verifying it. That was the quick list.
One thing that's sparked for Big U, speaking about Windows, I pinged on a ticket about this. I'm not really sure what our position is as a project on it. With WSL out, the Windows subsystem for Linux, which is actually quite terribly named, you can essentially run Cassandra on Windows in Bash on an Ubuntu distribution. So there really isn't a hell of a lot of pressure in terms of, for a dev environment perspective, us having Windows support. And NTFS's bonkers handling of hard junctions and stuff makes it so supporting it's a giant pain in the ass, the way the database is actually architected. So I don't know that we have necessarily a muscle in the past of saying, hey, is there a platform we're just going to say, you know, we don't support it anymore, make that decision, but Windows would be a good first candidate. Not that I have an axe to grind on the topic.
Yeah, there's also probably a separate question to ask that the reporter had originally mentioned, which I think was the breakage in 3x. But that can be a separate discussion and probably just on that ticket itself.
I guess my only question with that would be what the operator and like upgrade story is for that, like how easy it is to switch from something running on Windows to running on Bash on Windows, and like at least giving people that path.
Yeah, all of the everything, all the tooling, all the startup scripting, everything is different between the two platforms. From a UX perspective, they should be identical, but you know, the operative word in that statement is should, and that's not something I've personally taken a look at for 2 years, 3 years, and that was kind of my Sisyphean task. So somebody would definitely need to take a look at that and figure out how it's behaving. And WSL 2.0, the one where they're actually virtualizing on the hypervisor in Windows, which gives it much better file system performance, that hasn't actually gotten off the fast ring yet, so it's not part of the standard Windows distributions. So depending on the timing of 4.0 hitting, if our concern is people running Windows in production with Cassandra and wanting to give them an upgrade path to 4.0, that's very different than the discussion of people are using Windows as a dev environment and whether or not WSL would be sufficient for that.
Agreed. I was talking about the production case, and I have zero clue how many people run Cassandra on Windows in production. I imagine you have a better.
I don't know if anybody knows.
It's a low number. I'm going to tell you right now, it's a very low number, and they're probably using Docker.
Citation needed.
To the meta point,
My brain.
It sounds like we don't have a volunteer among members of this call to warrant production level Windows support at this point, though it may be that someone steps up or that a contributor appears with a patch that can be reviewed and then included to achieve that, which would be a step, but is possibly different from like a warranty.
Yeah, we do have precedent in the past in the project of a release hitting and then Windows support for that release hitting at a later date as well. So if that's something we wanted to go ahead and just formally say this is going to be our approach to 4.0, and we'll see if we can gather some data or figure out whether or not that's something that people would be interested in, go from there.
I wouldn't promise it until you have someone that's prepared to work on it.
It almost sounds like it's worth asking the community how much they want it and talking about deprecation if there is this other path now.
That sounds reasonable to me.
Yep. Unless Jordan, you'd like to pick that up.
Oh yeah, I'm super stoked to work on Windows stuff, you know? It's been my dream. No, I am happy to start like a Cassandra users mailing list thread saying like calling all Windows users, we're looking for help, testing, etc. if that is something people think would be helpful. And to start the deprecation discussion out of that if also helpful.
I think it'll be helpful, community guy talking, to find out who is actually doing it too. I would love to know if somebody raised their hand. That'd be very interesting.
Okay.
Testing 4.0 alpha releases too. We want. I think everybody wants the same for Linux as well. That's something we just need more of in general.
So should I keep this as simple as just asking people on the users list if they run Windows, or do we want to expand the scope of this to try and figure out more about Cassandra users and stuff like that?
I think more than just knowing if there are people, the thing that we need most is a contributor who's able to provide that support or complete that testing themselves. I worry about disenfranchisement if we were to take a poll and people would say, oh, I care so much about it, it matters more than anything. And then for that to just go into a black hole and create false hope.
Okay, so maybe more framing in the sense of like, hey, Cassandra users, we're looking for someone who runs on Windows to help us test the compatibility of 4 on Windows and help fix it when there are issues that have been found.
That sounds like great framing.
Okay.
Popping this back to John's earlier point, there are several areas that are in that doc that currently don't have someone who's signed up to lead testing or validation effort in those areas. Of the areas that were listed out earlier or additional ones that folks hadn't thought of, is there anybody on this call who'd be willing to pick one of those up and work to define what validation looks like?
This is Joey from. This is Joey. So I think that Dinesh is already kind of leading the way on documentation. I'd be happy to like kind of work with him on that. Like, so we could kind of. I know that we've been working with the Google Summer of Documentation project, and a bunch of patches just went out. So now we just have to kind of like review them and get them merged.
Nice, that sounds great. Actually, is there anybody on the call who could say a bit more about that raft of patches? I was extremely excited to see them, but also hadn't expected them at all at that moment.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about this. I have sent a couple updates. Nate and I have been talking to the contributor here who's contributing these documentation patches. And so we've done a first pass. Nate and I talked to this person. They identified areas that they wanted to contribute to. And so we are at a point where there are a bunch of tickets with subtasks, or rather one main ticket with a bunch of 20 subtasks, which have patches, individual patches for all the documentation updates that they would like to do. And I think John Haddad volunteered to review some of those. I'm reviewing some of those and helping commit those. So if there's anybody who's interested in taking a look at those tickets, because there are 20 of those, and about 3 or 4 of us reviewing. So if we can just look through all those tickets. And the main thing is that since this will be like in the official Cassandra documentation, we want to prevent any sort of inaccuracies. So it would be best if we can get to someone who actually worked, let's say, on repair to review the repair stuff. So maybe Blake or someone else who's more familiar with repair. And John is very passionate about producing documentation, so he actually has taken a look at a few tickets. That's where we are with the summer of this.
Sure, this is Vinay. So I took a couple of tickets, including the audit logging. So I'll review them and get them merged sometime this week.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I'd also like to volunteer. So I was looking through the patches, and generally I think that we need to get the diagrams a lot better before we upload them. If anybody wants help with the diagram, I volunteer my diagramming skills. So if you see a patch on the documentation that like lacks a good diagram or has a less good one, I'd be happy to whip up a good one for that.
Thanks, Joey. I'll take a look at some of the patches that I'm reviewing, and I think there are some diagrams that we need to update there as well.
Nice. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So Dinesh, just ping me in Slack or on the tickets on any ones that you want kind of prettied up.
One other area I wanted to check on too was third-party tooling, things like repair schedulers like Reaper, EC Chronos, or components like Priam that are wrapped around Cassandra. do we have any contributors who work with those projects who can offer experience on testing against the alpha build?
So with 4.0 alpha, we got it working with Priam in our environment, but with the latest builds, we can certainly see if it is working with the working with our tooling and talk about it.
Yeah, we can undo the hacks that we did before the alpha releases and just build against the alpha artifacts now. So we can at least validate that like it's buildable, and we can and we're actually running some trunk clusters right now, so we can like upgrade those and make sure that everything works.
Yes, and hi, this is Sumant. So I'm working on a couple of bug fixes on trunk. So as part of that, I will anyways have to get the trunk validated with our infra, the latest trunk validated. So I can check that and confirm.
Nice, that's awesome. Do we have any Reaper users on the call by chance? Or
got a Reaper developer here. I know Mick, Semweaver, and Alex are in the process of doing some testing and just getting Reaper ready for 4.0. We will probably make a new major release at some point near the 4.0 release, so it's all compatible. And that's sort of where things are at the moment. So it's just still ongoing testing with the backend and updates to the UI as well.
Nice. If you can, and if there are issues that you identify, either drop a note on the dev list or file a Jira ticket or drop something in Slack. I'm mentioning that primarily because if there's an issue that's impacting one repair scheduler, it's probably impacting a whole bunch of people. So if there's a small change that we can make as contributors to the project that make it easier for everybody, that might make more sense than updating every tool separately too. Yeah,
no worries. I'll let them know. If we do the meeting a bit early and next time, they'll probably turn up as well, and they can probably contribute a bit more about exactly what they're up to.
Nice. Any questions in general about the status of 4.0, how things are progressing, scope, things like that? Cool. One item that I added that I don't have a particular update on myself is the status of the 3.0 and 3.11 branches. Periodically, somebody raises the question, should we be cutting a release? And usually by the time somebody's remembered to ask that question, the answer is a pretty clear yes. But was curious if anybody wanted to speak to that directly.
We've gone back and forth on this in the past, over like the last almost 6 years now. Whether or not we just cadence it and say, look, every X weeks on this line, cut a patch or cut a release, regardless of how much is in there, or when it hits a certain body of work reactively, if major and critical tickets beyond count Y go in, go ahead and cut a release. But I don't think we've ever really formalized what our position is on that, and we probably see that in action here. So maybe worth having a discussion on the dev list about kind of our position on that, what we want to do with it. And in terms of like reactively dealing with where we are in the moment, for sure, we should deal with that. But 8 weeks from now, 12 weeks from now, 24 weeks from now, we're going to be in the same boat again. History would indicate that probably.
Yeah, I think we're in a trap with that, and that a lot of us on the call run our own branches, forks and stuff, and so we're less dependent on these things being put out there. And that's one of the things that we need to keep in mind, that there's a lot of users who are relying on us to patch or release when stuff comes out.
Cool. Sounds like a good one for us to follow up on the dev list and kick off that discussion then. Nice. Next item on the agenda was from Nate covering ApacheCon 2020.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So we just got the release from the ApacheCon folks that they're looking for a call for presentations. It's open until May, and I expected to see like 1 or 2 more housekeeping items from them in terms of like room space and everything before they pull the trigger on that. So I don't have that much more information than what we've gotten folks on the PMC on the private list yet. I'm going to distill that and send it around in a day or two once I know a little bit more about specifics. And for everyone else, and there's a lot of folks who aren't on the call, unfortunately, but anyone who wants to get involved with us, certainly on the PMC to review conversations. I'm just going to add everybody this year and let them jump in and do ratings on stuff, because it seemed like we had some miscommunication on that last year with Dinesh and myself driving that. And, a couple other folks who helped jumped in to do reviews. So we'll open that up. I don't know from a noise factor, maybe we can take a couple other people for review stuff independently, but that's generally provides more of like an operational headache just to, verify who's who and what's what type of thing. So it might just be, we restricted it to people with commit rights already for paper reviews. We can talk about that too. We'll bring that to the dev list and users list shortly, but I know a little bit more, have a little bit more information. But we're moving forward with that. That's basically what I wanted to say. Again, it's this kind of this not anywhere near as well managed as you think it is for conferences. So I try to just provide as much information as I get from them. It's all volunteer effort, and it's one of those things where we just gotta get involved and pay attention. So you'll know what I know as soon as I see it on the mailing list, and we'll try to make it less of more interactive than it was last year, so people feel like they have more of a say of it. But we're doing that again. So anybody on this call who wants to get ready to submit a talk, we'd like to see it. It'd be great. And there's more submissions we can get, the better. And for folks who don't know, we had the most users and people specifically attending for the Cassandra track than any other track at Apache last year. So,
thanks for mentioning the more interactive piece as well. I remember from talking to several folks that some felt that one of the most valuable parts of the summit was actually toward the end, where many of us were just hanging out in an open space on the carpet in a circle, talking and doing some planning around who could work on what toward 4.0. Do you know if there might be more breakout space or rooms available for discussion like that rather than strictly presentation?
Unfortunately, we found out after the fact that the structure was a lot more rigid than we thought it was. Like, we had to end on the hour and fit in these talks. And they got enough pushback this year that they're going to do something different, I think. But again, I haven't seen anything to that effect on the planners list yet. That's one of the things I'm going to bring up, because I would love to do that and have a lot more freedom to organize how we do our track. Because their goal was to keep people from wandering in from other tracks and being lost. And my whole point was that, well, if the people who are largely here for the Cassandra track for itself. So I care, but I don't care type of thing. And so I'll try to push on that to get as much of that breakout space as that what we used to do in a lot of the stuff, and to provide for that as much as possible. But no guarantees, because we do have to fit within the rigid confines of what they do. Though apparently they're going to relax that a bit this year.
So I was going to add, so this is, by the way, for everyone, this is September 28th to October 2nd. It's right on the cusp of the September-October transition in New Orleans, which is Las Vegas and New Orleans. What is the trend here? But yeah, so this is going to be later. But Nate, I was going to add, if we did this years ago, DataStax sponsored a space near ApacheCon. That if that's an option, and I would be happy to talk to the ApacheCon folks about that, just so that they don't have to go crazy. But I agree. I think it's that if anybody who wasn't there, it was pretty impressive. I mean, it was the Cassandra conference and friends. There's a few other projects there, but it was really cool to see that. I mean, it was dominating the whole floor, the expo area and everything. But meeting on the carpet, which was cool and felt pretty grassroots, I think we could probably do a little better with just a bit of money injected into it. And I'd be willing to take that up.
Cool. Again, as soon as I find out anything, I'll let everyone know. It's a volunteer process, so it's just a matter of making sure I filter all the email and watch the Slack channels type of thing. And that said, anyone who wants to subscribe to the event planner stuff can do that. Because if you have a, I think you can just join without an Apache ID, but you may need an Apache ID. I have to double check. But the same, you can join the Slack channel. Anyone can join the planner Slack channel, and there's a lot of conversation there too.
Echoing that point on planning, it felt like several of us were kind of running around realizing very basic things at the last minute, like, oh, we should have adapters at the podium. There should be a power plug there. Whereas people who have formal event planning expertise have very elaborate checklists that make sure things go super smooth. Some of that was learning on the fly.
Along with that early minor request, since we're apparently the large portion of the conference would be water near the Cassandra room instead of a mile away.
That was a big deal in Las Vegas, I hear, because it was like 1,000,000 degrees outside.
Yeah, it was actually a thing.
Yeah, I'll do what I can to get everything we're going to have in the rooms ahead of time. I'll create a document and just have some checklists on the wiki that we can get for this, and just make sure we have everything going into this, and just like assume no like a material support from the ASF other than like here's a space with a mic type of thing.
Yeah, to clarify, that was a really great surprise, and I don't think that the conference would have happened last year at all had it not been for ASF's contribution there and the generous offer of space too. So I'm so glad that worked out. Maybe together as a group we can start the doc that Nate mentioned and then crowdsource improvements that we'd make this year and see how we can make it a more successful event too. Cool. So we actually just raced through every item on our agenda. I'm not going to pretend that there are more things that are there, but there are also a lot of people who haven't spoken and shared too. Are there other items that folks had interest in covering or questions that people have that we should talk about?
So I did have a quick just 4.0 ask for everyone that's working on developing and testing it. I've proposed that now's a really good time to try and work on any user-facing features that will affect things like configuration or metrics or logging or anything that anyone who has a dependency on us needs finalized so that they can do their work. It's nice to polish things and speed things up and optimize memory usage, those kinds of things. But it would be really, really, really nice if we could close out reviews that we have in progress and finish up anything that touches configs, metrics, protocol, any of that kind of stuff. That's all I had to say.
Another point which we were discussing on the chat was, should we move this meeting to 11 a.m. Pacific, which will be 2 hours early than what we are starting now? The advantage of that is it will be more convenient for people in Europe, and also for people in New Zealand, it will be 7 a.m. So though 7 a.m. sounds earlier, right? So that's why either we move it back by 1 hour or 2 hours. If we move it back by 1 hour, it'll be lunchtime, but so that's something. What does other people think? Should we do a thread on it for the next time, or this is the right place to discuss that?
Let's do a thread on it, because it's one of those things like somebody's always going to get the short end of the stick, and we're just going to have to flip flop. It's like the best practice, like for people like folks on the U.S. West Coast will be the least stressed on this, but like we'll just have to go back and forth between the EU and APAC. That's the only way to do this fairly.
Okay.
Sandcalp, this is what I was planning on doing, and I'm glad there's a good discussion going in the chat, but that's getting lost as soon as I hit close. But what I think would probably be a good idea is some sort of easy poll or something. I'll do a summary on the dev list of what we talked about. I'll take that, and then just to follow up with, okay, time zones, let's talk about this and come up with some sort of basic rotation. I think it just gives people the ability to plan ahead. So if it's going to be out of your time zone, you don't even plan ahead. But I think that what I've seen from other open source projects that do this sort of thing is you try to get as planned out as possible, just so that everyone can work around schedules. This is a massive coordination issue. Everybody has different jobs, different time zones, everything. So the more we can put out ahead of things and try to be as accommodating as possible, I think the more participation. That's really the key. How do we get more people to participate? And yeah, so I just look out for that email, but I think there's the conversation here has been pretty good. To that, well, before we get further down there, I just noticed in chat as well, and I want to flesh this out because I'm monitoring the chat. Jeff, and I'm assuming this is Jeff Jersa, brought up a really interesting point. Says, anyone want to touch on timing to unlock trunk? So he just throws a grenade, just toss. There you go. I feel like that's something that should be discussed.
So what I would say on that front is, I think like when we are close to beta, right, that is the time we should be thinking about unlocking trunk. And we can always have a discussion on the dev list on it, because I think like this might not be the best place to discuss it, considering there are so many people on this call. So we should definitely start a thread on when is the right time to do it. But it cannot be in months. It has to be deliverable. It has to be like what needs to happen for that to happen, than a magical 2-month time or a 3-month time. If cutting, so that's what I would say.
What I would add to that too is this came up in Vegas, and that's why we came up with the list of like criteria for exiting alpha, exiting beta, exiting GM, etc. And actually there were many people there outside of like me who was ready to do it in beta when we initially proposed this freeze, that wanted to wait to fork all the way until GM, which I was actually surprised about. But I think there's definitely a wide range of opinions here when it comes to should we branch or not. And again, I'd point us at the exit criteria that we made to help us judge this specifically.
I think a thread of the mailing list would be great. And not to subvert anything, but like even in GCC, not everybody was there. And this is the whole Apache way of, if it doesn't happen on the mailing list, it doesn't happen. Because that's the one way we know we can get everybody engaged and discussing what's going on with things. Although we did, of course, discuss it.
I'm thinking it was discussed and voted on the mailing list?
Yeah, that's what I just clarified. This was discussed. Yes.
Yeah, so one of the points I wanted to bring up was Sumant contributed, like there was this big discussion about release lifecycle and what criteria we apply for every stage of the transition from alpha to beta to GA. So I'm looking at that document and it says that the expectation is that we have a branch created for the release when we say, you have GA. So it feels to me that that was something that was already discussed, but we can discuss it more. But it seems like when we discussed it, people were like, hey, Cassandra 4.0 has to be stable to a point that we can branch it and call it GA. That was the discussion, I think, that happened back then. But we can definitely look through those mail threads and discuss it again if that is something that everybody wants to do.
Another point which we want to also make on this one is we should branch out when there is not enough work to stabilize 4.0 and people want to keep working on it. And even without branching out, people can always, even today, if they want, they can work on branches. It's just that they won't be able to merge in. We want to prioritize work done to stabilize 4.0, and having 2 branches makes that you have to now merge on 2. So one of the example is, let's say if we branch out today, and then someone merges a big PR on that, then any work which is happening on 4.0 now have to get rebased on 2 branches, which means we are in a way hindering the amount of work happening on stability. That's what I would say. So not branching doesn't mean people can't start working on their fork. It's just that we are prioritizing the stability work over the features.
I agree with that point, and that's probably the point that I'd offer as well. It probably,
and if anyone is getting restricted right now not to work on it, show me the branch, right? You can always show us the branch and give examples. That's the best way of showing that the branching is not working out, is by telling me, okay, I have a branch I cannot merge, and it is 5,000 lines of code or whatever, and that's why I can't basically do it. So if anyone wants to have that, if anyone is thinking that that's the problem which we are having, then please give examples on the dev list showing that that is a problem.
Yeah, sounds like it'd be good to discuss on the dev list. And it's also not a topic that is settled one time. I think it's fine for us to continue revisiting that and to continue assessing completion against the criteria that people discuss together. So it's a good one to bring up and a good one for us to talk about on the list.
Okay, are we have we bottomed out this topic? Sounds like we have. Really the final topic, which I'm hoping we can put a nice bookmark on, is there anything that we need to talk about in this format? I mean, this was an experiment, of course, you know, and I know we're going to get better at these, but I personally, I love it because we are able to talk and we are able to, you know, get some things out there. Talked about a bunch of stuff on the dev list. Any suggestions about next time?
I think 4.0 specific to the goal of getting 4.0 done, having a very focused status conversation on 4.0, maybe a little bit more prepared for than today. And I'm happy to volunteer to help whoever with that, would be beneficial. Because like, again, really the best thing to getting 4.0 done, as Sanko said, is like working on those tickets and prioritizing those things. So having that be visible, I think would be helpful.
Okay. No, I think that one of the things I mentioned early in the call, and this is just me trying to help put some order into this chaos, which is easy to do, right? Is if you're going to if you put an agenda item up, who wants to own that agenda item so that you can drive it?
Yeah,
I've seen some
that like
I'm not trying to call you out, Jordan.
I think 4.0, like saying 4.0, like, hey, someone's just going to volunteer is probably not going to happen. We probably need a small group of people willing to like make sure it's prepared for next time, I guess. And I guess I'm volunteering myself since I'm bringing it up.
Yeah.
And I'll volunteer myself too.
So yeah, like if John, Josh, and Mackenzie and I made that a priority for next time. Josh, I'm volunteering you.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you just volunteer, Josh? I heard that. And
yeah.
I did hit record, by the way. So there you go. It's now permanent. That brings me to my next question: is pacing. Given there's a lot of energy around 4.0 and you know things that need to be done to get it across the finish line, you know, I think we talked about once a quarter, but that seems like that'd be really a long ways between things. What the two pacings that I'm thinking of is the longer haul, which would be once a month, or maybe a short-term haul, which is like every couple of weeks. And every 2 weeks is probably as fast as we'd want to go. Weekly would be really hard unless somebody has a good reason to do that.
I think it's probably a good. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Whoever.
I was going to propose about a month.
Yeah, that feels intuitive to me too. And toward the energy of 4.0, I think the most important thing isn't so much talking about it as drawing additional contributors into the project to work on those items. The set of contributors that are currently working toward 4.0 items in Jira and on that list are pretty small and aren't terribly diverse in terms of their affiliation. And if there are more people who can join and contribute resources, I think that's one of the most important things that can happen toward shipping 4.0 faster.
Okay, I will, again, just as to get maximum input, I'm hearing once a month is great, but I'll pose this as a question on the dev list as well, just to make sure we have good coverage. I like the reasoning, you know, that this is good, to have reasons for it. So I'll take those two items, the time zone, trying to do that. And if we say, yeah, once a month, then I will chart out the next 6 months worth of times where we'll meet. And I'm not sure if there's a calendar out there that we can use. Maybe that's another item I need to figure out. Does Confluence have a calendar?
I hope so.
With iCal you can subscribe to? Oh, that'll be amazing. That's probably something to figure out. But anyway, if we could chart out at least having it in that document, here's the next 6 meetings and calendar appropriately, but at least everyone can plan ahead.
And to Benedict's point, it's super important that we discuss that on the dev list and have that hashed out in advance.
Yeah.
I wish I had been more open about that on that list instead of in Slack and in other forums too. That'll help increase visibility in people who are able to attend.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great.
Can I ask one other question?
Well, I said this was the end. I'm kidding.
Please, Patrick, I'll buy you. No. I brought up tickets about this, but I didn't know if we're finalizing things for 4.0, if it's too late to talk about this, but sometimes I think people get the wrong impression about certain things, like just in terms of like defaults for a variety of different settings. Is it okay to revisit that for 4.0 at this stage in the game? I'm just wondering, and I can start a dev list thread about this, but I mean, I had mentioned specifically compaction throughput as kind of one of those, like, but I think token ranges is another good candidate, just because people have been saying, oh yeah, that's one of the first things you change is number of token ranges. I'm trying to make it more accessible for people on the first user experience, and didn't know if 4.0 was, if it was too late for that to say, let's make this more approachable in the sense of, why do we have a setting set to something when we tell everybody to change it when they first use it, kind of thing. Does that make sense to people? Or does that ring kind of familiar to people?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a fine thing to start a thread about. I think the standard that I've seen or heard a bunch of people applying for whether or not a change is a good candidate is whether including it either violates the spirit of not introducing new features or invalidates existing work that's been done toward testing and validation. I don't get the sense that some of the property changes that you mentioned would risk that type of invalidation. It sounds like a good thing to bring up.
Okay, yeah, just in the spirit of making it more friendly or out of the box. Cool, thanks.
And when we bring it up on the dev list, whatever we decide, we should move it actually in the life cycle, release life cycle, because we should write it in the I was just searching the doc. We don't have anything to do with the defaults. I think we should paste it in like, when is it too early or too late to change the defaults? Like, can we change defaults in alphas, right? If we decide on that, then we should write it explicitly there. That at some point in the release, we can't just keep changing defaults.
True, good point, because people are testing based on the defaults oftentimes.
Well, I would say specifically for the number of tokens, we test on 32. We don't ever test 256. So that's a likely candidate for a default change.
Michael, you saying all our automated testing runs with 32?
That is correct. To the best of my knowledge, I'm not in front of a computer right now.
That does seem a little odd, doesn't it?
And that would be another thing that we could bring up too, is just to say, let's make it, because of this disconnect, say, okay, well, let's review specific settings, and if we override those for testing, then that might be a good candidate as well, to say, you know, since we're already testing using these settings, it may make sense to say, let's go ahead and migrate to that for the default so that people aren't caught off guard when they put it live. Not that people shouldn't test themselves, but you know what I mean.
Totally makes sense, yep.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, if we're testing against different values to the defaults, we're not really testing the release because we're releasing something that has a different set of values and that could potentially change the behavior. So that's a very good reason to actually move the defaults to what we're testing to.
All right, I think that that ends it for now. This went really smooth, and I'm a little nervous about that. It went too well. I'm waiting for where's the explosion? Zoom seems to work. I think I'll be asking folks too, is how is Zoom working? I mean, it does seem that this is one that works well for most people. It has the most options and it has capacity. So I will, right after the meeting, I'll render out the video and try to get that posted right away. I know Joey's been taking notes, so those will get posted. The video and the notes will be posted in Confluence. I will send an email out, hopefully by tomorrow, just summarizing, hey, this happened, here's where all the notes are. And I'll put in a couple of those like quick polls like time zone and pacing, so we can get some consensus on the mailing list. That's what I had on my list. Any final items before I cancel out of here?
I just wanted to echo that thanks to Patrick for helping organize the space, and to Joey for taking notes without having coordinated in advance on doing that. I was just skimming through what he prepared, and this is really elaborate. Thanks.
Yeah, these notes are awesome. Thanks, Joey. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for participating.